this is a planet-sized spaceship. You don't know if there are families in there. You don't know if, like, Luke, what did you just do? You genocidal maniac. You just destroyed hundreds, if not thousands of people. And they're all like cheering. They're like, woo, yeah, we won. Like, if you didn't have the context of how bad the bad guys were, then you could very well say Luke is a genocidal maniac. The rebels are evil people.
Love God, love people, love people, love people. It's the AC Podcast. For the love of God, love people.
Hi, Andy Steiger here. Before we get into the podcast, I want to take a moment to briefly let you know about an exciting initiative that we have coming up. Apologetics Canada recently received grant funding for our newest film initiative that we'll be shooting in Malawi between around May 10th to the 22nd. It's a project that will be focused on a theology of technology and will be released in 2025. We have space for a few people to join us on this initiative. You can help with the filming process, and as well, we'll be hosting a summit there in Malawi and working with missionaries that are using technology to help people. It's going to be an exciting project to work on. We would love for you to come. You can go to apologeticscanada.com and apply today and find out more information.
Hey everybody, welcome to the AC Podcast. Steve here. I am your host for the day. I'm here with Andy Steiger and Wes Huff. How you doing, gentlemen?
Excellent.
Good to go.
Good to go. Something that you don't really get to see, our listeners and viewers, is that we mightily struggle with technology just before we got on. It looks like everything is going great, so let's get into it. Today we're going to talk a little bit about this video clip that's been going around recently. For those of you who don't know these names, just keep these names in the back of your mind. Alex O'Connor, a.k.a. the Cosmic Skeptic, is a very kind of popular YouTube atheist personality. And then he interviewed Richard Dawkins. Now, if you don't know who Richard Dawkins is, perhaps you've been living under a rock for the last 20 years or so, but he is one of the most famous atheists out there today. Or at least he was. I should say, we'll get into that. But Wes,
infamous,
you brought
maybe.
this... Infamous, yeah, that's a good word. Wes, you brought this to our attention, so give us some background here. What are we talking about today?
Yeah, so Cosmic Skeptic, who is a pretty popular YouTuber, he has over 500,000 subscribers on YouTube. He's done a number of interviews with a number of prominent Christians, both in the UK and in North America. He lives in the UK, I believe. He's certainly British. And this popped up. I subscribed to him, and this popped up on my YouTube homepage, and I saw, oh, he interviewed Richard Dawkins. And then yesterday, there was a clip that was taken out of that where Alex O'Connor asked Richard Dawkins, of all the religious individuals who you've debated, who's the best? And Dawkins says, nobody. And I think, since then there's been a number of traction. I've seen it posted around on Twitter quite a bit. And our friend and friend of the ministry, Andy Bannister, posted an article on Unbelievable.
Premier Christianity.
On Premier Christianity. And so I think it's gaining an appropriate amount of attention. And we just wanted to chat about that. Chat about, why do we have these kind of reactions to these prominent figures, and particularly this one and his attitude with that question and answer.
It was a little bit more than that too, and maybe we should just play the clip so that people could see it, because he specifically asked him, were there any good arguments, or what was the best argument, kind of thing, and he doesn't think there are any.
So yeah, I think Andy is right. There is definitely more to this. I think it'll help to watch the video clip here. We'll just play a brief portion of it. So here we go.
Who's the most formidable debate opponent that you have had in your career that you can think of now on this question of God's existence?
I don't think there are any. Not that I'm formidable myself, but I don't think that there are any very good arguments.
No point in a debate where you're sat there getting ready to get up and give your 10-minute rebuttal while they're speaking, writing your notes and thinking, oh gosh, what am I going to say to that? That's a fair point.
I don't think so. I mean, I don't want to sound arrogant. It's not that I've got great points. It's just that I don't think there are any good points to be made.
And maybe it's something about the debate format as well. You know, everybody's so prepared that
Yes.
you're rarely caught off guard.
Yes. I mean, the sort of professional debaters on behalf of religion, people like William Craig, I've no time for him. I mean, he's got this sort of loud, rather pompous voice, and he says premise 1, deduction 2, and things like that, and the audience, I suppose, is supposed to be impressed.
Let's stop it there, because I think that's
I've had
fascinating. What do you guys think of that? What's your first reactions?
I have so many reactions.
Yeah. Richard Dawkins is a gift that keeps giving of himself, I think. Yeah, I mean, on the one hand, I appreciate the fact that he tries to be humble, right? It's not that I have all the good arguments, but
That humility is couched.
yeah, I think so. And so that really stood out to me for one.
I guess one of the things that stands out to me is I'm almost kind of confused at one level where I'm not even sure whether or not he feels like he has any good arguments either. And is he just trying to say that this should be some sort of discussion? I mean, because the fact that he's kind of poking fun at Craig giving or using logic and, using
Presenting
logical
philosophy,
terminology.
Presenting standard philosophical argumentation and being like,
Right.
oh, well, that's just pompous.
Yeah, and that's like textbook debate. Like that's how you have a debate, is you put forward your premises. So, and then you have to rebut those. And that's actually one of the biggest critiques, though, that was leveled against the new atheists is, please stop debating William Lane Craig because you guys don't know how to debate. And so I think that's a problem in of itself.
Yeah, you know what I thought was interesting in that response is that he was confusing, because O'Connor wasn't actually asking whether Dawkins thought any of the rebuttals were true, just that they were good. I've definitely had skeptics pose questions to me that I thought were good questions, good
Absolutely,
rebuttals, but thought that they were untrue. And it's almost as if Dawkins could not grant that something could be both good and false at the same time. Like I think the problem of evil is a good argument against Christianity because it has a very, a powerful, logical, but also emotional thrust to it. I don't necessarily think it undoes Christianity, but I think that there are good objections.
Do you know what I find fascinating, by the way, is because when I saw this clip, I was immediately reminded of this book. I don't know if you could see this. It's called Coming to Faith Through Dawkins. It was just released this last year. I mean, it's fresh off the
floor
printer, the printing press. I don't know. It was just recently released. And in it, when you read it, it's a great read. And by the way, I got to give a shout out to our Apologetics Canada conference that's coming up March 1-2 here in British Columbia, because we have one of the authors in it, Ashley Landy, is going to be here with us at the conference. But when I was reading through this is a great book. It's a great read. But what was fascinating with people coming to faith and coming to faith through, and it's not just Dawkins in it. Like, for example, Ashley really resonated with Christopher Hitchens. So it's different different, kind of new atheists that actually moved them towards faith. And one of the things that you see in it is how much that sort of posture that Dawkins has, where he doesn't grant, anything, and has that more or less pompous attitude, really rubs people the wrong way and makes them go, something doesn't smell right here, that you can't see any positive arguments.
And I think this has been a problem of the new atheism in general, is that individuals who are experts on one specific topic or discipline start writing on areas where they're not experts and start to really flub it. And I think this is the difference between Dawkins' work on biology, which is, as far as I know, top-notch, and then his work on philosophy and theology in something like The God Delusion, which is just like, you could have a problem passing an intro class at a first-year university kind of program because of that. I actually pulled up, so there was a review done by this guy named Terry Eagleton in the London Review when The God Delusion came out, which is one of Dawkins's most prominent books. And I'll just read this for you because I thought this was interesting. He said, and this is not a Christian by any means, but he said, imagine someone holding forth on biology whose only knowledge of the subject is the Book of British Birds, and you have a rough idea of what it feels like to read Dawkins on theology. Card-carrying rationalists like Dawkins, who is the nearest thing to a professional atheist we have had since Bertrand Russell, are in one sense the least well-equipped to understand what they castigate, since they don't believe there is anything there to be understood, or at least anything worth understanding. I thought that was interesting. It's like the equivalent of someone reading the British Book on Birds, writing a textbook on biology, is the equivalent of Richard Dawkins being an expert in biology, writing something on philosophy and theology. And I think we're still seeing that. We're still seeing that. He still hasn't come to terms with the fact that there are other disciplines that have experts.
Yeah, and I just find it really interesting that given the sort of lack of philosophical rigor in his writings, that his books were such a hit. So that in and of itself concerns me. But on the other hand, when I look at his reaction, I see a mirror image of that by some Christians who say that atheism is this complete nonsense. At least some of us use that kind of language, right? Atheism makes no sense. It is this. I think atheism is wrong. Certainly, at the end of the day, it's wrong. But I don't think that atheists make no good arguments. That's far from it. And so, in a sense, I look at them and I go, man, like that's something that I have to be careful of as a Christian. I don't want to fall into that sort of triumphalism.
You know, it's interesting, Steve. I talk about this sort of idea with parents where I just explain, listen, when you're having conversations with your kids and you're talking through these things, even if you might feel strongly about them, make sure that you're couching your terminology and demonstrating a posture of humility and love. I mean, you are talking about people here, and first of all, and second of all, when you're dealing with ideas, it's important to come at those from a posture of seeking to understand and at some level, a level of charity that at least makes you not look like a jerk, because it really is key, and also can create the question of does mom and dad really know what they're talking about? Because if they can't see anything positive or anything negative, right? If you can't bridge that gap, because then what happens is you start to explore those things for yourself, and you're like, well, I can. I could see that that's a good argument against Christianity, or I could see this is a good argument against atheism. And right, and if you haven't been able to demonstrate that at all, you actually just demonstrate to you, at least if we're talking about our kids here, it starts to raise questions for your kids going, I don't know if I can trust that you know what you're talking about.
Yeah, that's the biggest thing is trust, because when you say something so extremist to there are no good arguments, and you're setting yourself up really high, and when you set yourself up that high, when your foundation is removed, you're going to have to fall that far down. When I talk to parents, one of the things that I'd like to point out is there's a difference between an argument being true and sound versus something being persuasive. I mean, you can be persuaded by false things. I know right. I have been in the past. And so when your child is persuaded by something, so you want to look at whether, this is true or not, obviously, but what is it that persuaded you about this? Look at that together, and how you go through that process. Your kids will remember that more than what it is you actually said.
Yeah. Steel manning a position goes a long way. And steel manning, for the listener who doesn't know that term, the opposite of a steel man would be a straw man, where you attack an argument that's not actually the argument that someone is making. Steel manning would be the opposite. Find the best version of that argument, and that's what you should interact with.
Well, talking about persuasiveness and being persuaded, it is interesting in this conversation where first of all, I just want to say that Alex did a great job.
Phenomenal job.
In the interview. And why did he do such a good job, I would say? Because he can appreciate both sides of an argument. I actually really appreciate that about him.
Yeah, and I think even his reaction to this particular moment shows that, where because he's talked to individuals like William and Craig. He's had them on his show. He knows that they have good arguments.
Yeah, I do find that Alex has really good reputation, even among Christians on YouTube, because to me, he seems very fair-minded. And at the same time, as much as I was sort of in some ways cringing at some of the things that Richard Dawkins was saying, I thought he was pretty respectful. And, as an Asian, I'm just like, Alex, so many brownie points from me to you. Love what you're doing. Anyway.
No, I appreciate it. And this is something that in the New Atheist you really never saw. So in many ways for Alex, he's like, kudos on you that you can at least have a more respectful conversation, and one that is more even-handed and fair-minded, which is appreciated. I still think you're wrong, of course, but I appreciate that you can, at least I get the impression that you can see the arguments more clearly than I felt with the others that I've seen over the years. Now, what I find though truly interesting for me was the reason why Dawkins has refused to debate Craig. I've always wondered, why it was, and I think that in some regards, people kind of postulated that it was a fear of Craig, and Craig is so masterful at debates. There's no question about that. So I think this is one of the reasons why even Alex was pressing him on it is, we've all debated him, but you. And it actually kind of looks bad on us because it has kind of seeded this idea that you're afraid of him. But in this dialogue, it's quite clear that that's not why. He just doesn't like him.
Yeah.
No, that's true.
And there's a specific reason why.
Yeah, and as you watch the clip a little further, Dawkins actually explains why. And one of the things that he's really repulsed by is Craig's views on the slaughter of the Canaanites and the Midianites and Amalekites, so on and so forth, right? Because as far as Dawkins is concerned, rather than like other saner theologians who actually just admit that these things didn't happen, he would say, right? Craig actually bites the bullet and defends this horrific slaughter of people. Oh, like they say, the Midianites were sinful and so they had to be slaughtered, kind of thing. And he finds that so morally egregious, right? And Craig is an apologist of that.
On that, what I thought was really interesting is closer to the beginning of this interview, Alex and Dawkins are going back and forth on like why they would say that they were necessarily an atheist. And Dawkins says to Alex, you probably have more moral objections, like the problem of evil and those types of things. But I'm not really interested in those things. I just think that the base presuppositions of Christianity are false. And so therefore, I'm more interested on whether it's true than whether it's good. But then later on starts to highlight, the reason he doesn't like individuals like Craig are moral reasons. Mm-hmm. And I found this constantly throughout this conversation is Dawkins keeps going back and forth when it's convenient to him oh, I'm not a Christian. I'm not religious because I just think it's false. I don't care about, all that moral and beauty stuff. But then starts appealing to moralism. And even when they were talking about the origin of life, says, yeah, I think we would probably find a theory at some point that was just so put together and convincing. And I remember thinking, he's, dare you say beautiful? Dare you say, like, that's an argument for beauty, that we could figure out something that is just so impactfully beautiful that it had to be true. It's like, come on, you have to figure out what your method is. You're all over the place.
I know this, listening to it, there were many people that were that have debated him that are groaning at this juncture because I just recently had been talking a couple months ago to John Lennox about his debate with Dawkins, and like so many things that Dawkins was saying about he'll only debate, theologians that don't believe that Adam and Eve exist, for example, or, that don't hold to this Old Testament, nonsense. And I'm like the people that you, and Alex did push back on him on this. He's like, no, they would hold to that. There's actually not as much difference between those people like John Lennox and Dr. Craig as you would like to make out. For example, I would agree, though, of course, that Craig's response that Dawkins is specifically referencing was not very eloquently put, let's say, or it wasn't very nuanced, and he just did not like the moral indifference, I think, that he felt to the slaughter or the killing of children and the like that you read about in places like Joshua.
Yeah. And this was one of the critiques earlier on. There was a list of essays called "The Straw Dogs," written by I always get this wrong. Is it John Gray? That who?
John A. Gray, yeah.
John A. Gray, right? Two John Grays.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, two John Grays. One wrote "Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus." I'm not talking about that John Gray. So who was an atheist, at the London School of Economics, who called out Dawkins and said, "Listen, buddy, you don't really have any moral basis to say that something like the death of children is wrong if you really hold to what you're saying in your other books on biology, because what you're doing is and I think he used the term smuggling from religious moralism. It's like you want to say at the exact same time, that has no basis, but at the exact same time, I'm going to use it because it's, once again, convenient." And I couldn't help but think that this interview with Alex O'Connor was the death rattle of New Atheism. It's like the last little bit of life that's trying to, push its way forth. But at the end of the day, I think even an atheist like Alex O'Connor totally saw just the emptiness of something like the New Atheism in its biggest character of Richard Dawkins.
Yeah, it should be called the Dead Atheism.
Yeah, the Dead Atheism.
New Atheism, in the first place, there was nothing really new about it in terms of arguments and things like that. What was more kind of newer, I guess, is the vitriol with which they attacked religion as a whole and Christianity in particular. But this, like you said, Wes, this is kind of the death rattle of New Atheism, and I agree, because it was all the more striking because as soon as Richard Dawkins said, "I don't think there are any good arguments, and I don't think there's anybody that really, presented a really good argument," kind of thing, my mind immediately went to this interview that I've seen of Christopher Hitchens. And remember, Christopher Hitchens had actually gone against William Lane Craig at Biola University. And he said, "Oh yeah, William Lane Craig is a very, very tough opponent, very, very tough." Right. And so here is another new atheist who was like, actually, William Lane Craig is a really good debater. And then there's that. And then on the other hand, recently we saw a new atheist, Ayaan Hirsi Ali, right, from Somalia, who kind of grew up in Islam. She was sort of, I guess, I don't know if adopted is the right word, but she was seen as another sort of a lesser but still a new atheist figure.
Well, she was supposed to be at the meeting. There was a meeting that solidified the four horsemen of the atheist apocalypse, which was Sam Harris, Richard Dawkins, Daniel Dennett, and Who's the other one? Who am I missing?
Did you mention Dawkins? Dawkins, Hitchens.
Dawkins, Hitchens, Sam Harris.
And
Daniel
Dennett.
Dennett. Yeah. Iron Herceli was supposed to be there. And I believe the story is that her flight was late. And that was the meeting that kind of was, so she's like an honorary member, but she wasn't officially at like the club inception.
Yeah. And then lately she came out saying that she was a Christian. And so when you say it's a death rattle of new atheism, that really resonates with me.
Well, it was a thought that went through my mind as well. And it's something I actually just talked about with my, I'm teaching this college class right now, and I was talking with them about that just yesterday, saying these days I don't even come across very many atheists. I don't know about you guys, but I really don't. Not like I used to, not when it was being popularized by Dawkins and the like. These days, New Age is what I'm coming across. I come across it's much more of a religious bent to it than I come across atheism.
Yeah. And I think that has the seeds of new atheism that were planted really grew up to be pretty hopeless fruit. That people realized, if you're going to tell me I'm just matter and motion, time plus matter plus chance, that there's really no purpose and meaning because we're all going to die at the heat death of the universe anyways, then that doesn't really encourage people to go pursue goals or values or, and I think people realize that, where they said, we kind of like this this confrontational aspect of these guys. We like they go out and they call it like they say that it is. But at the end of the day, people don't want to feel hopeless. They don't want to feel like they don't matter, or they matter more than their matter. And so I think, and that's why we've really seen this rise in sort of new age spirituality, because even though it's pretty empty, it also gives some sort of facade of meaning.
I would agree with you, Wes, although I'm not quite as optimistic, I guess, because here's what I would say. I would say on the one hand, I completely agree with you, and I think that's why we have books like this, with 12 different essays of people who came to faith because of the new atheists, and I've met plenty of people that have come to faith because of the new atheists, right? Because of its shallowness, not just in its answers, but in its worldview, which is what you're getting after there.
Yeah.
However, I think there's more going on to this story of why the new atheists are out of favor and why Dawkins himself has become out of favor. And that is that the worldview that we're encountering more and more, that's an ontology of sexuality, if you will, and particular in extreme individualism, doesn't really have space for atheism. I mean, take transgenderism as an example. If I believe that I am within a transgender worldview, a sex, which is a body, and a gender, which is controlled by the mind, that requires a worldview that allows for dualism of some level, and that those two can be out of sync and that the mind triumphs the body. Well, atheism can't facilitate that. And this is where, by the way, I think a lot of atheists have lost favor in general, is because of how cowardly they've been to stand up to culture. They've been triumphal against Christianity, but in cancel culture, they have been cowardly. But Dawkins, to his credit, has stood up against different ideologies like transgenderism and had, what was it, his Humanism of the Year award revoked because of that. But I mean, I don't know about you guys, but there's some people like Neil deGrasse Tyson. DeGrasse Tyson, thanks. Whenever people want you to say their middle name as a part, it just throws me off. At any rate, so we got him, but we also have Bill Nye, of course, the science guy, and you're like, you're no longer Bill Nye the science guy. You're Bill Nye the political guy. I mean, you don't even hold to what you used to be teaching about quote unquote science. And I think this is also, I don't know what you guys think, but I think this is a big part of why they've lost so much favor.
Yeah, I think you're right, Andy. I think that's a big component of it. And you even see guys like Sam Harris who have moved way further along on the spectrum of advocating for things like transcendental meditation and almost like it's not a spirituality, but it invokes a lot of the aspects of Eastern mysticism. And you would not have had that. I mean, I don't think what Sam Harris is advocating for now, Dawkins would have any, time of day for. Because I think that the new atheists, who all used to be in this kind of compact group, they've kind of drifted in different directions, and they're not really on the same page anymore. But I think Dawkins is trying to. I think he's the last one that's really just trying to hold on to that. And you saw that in this interview with Alex O'Connor, in the sense that Alex was really trying to push Dawkins at a few points and saying, can we answer the big questions about the meaning of life, or no, the origin of life, rather, not the meaning of life. And Dawkins kept wanting to fall back to, well, Darwin has answered the question of the origin of species. And that's the big question anyways. And you could see Alex being like, yeah, but you're like 5 kilometers down the road. Like yeah, sure. Dawkins is very enamored with Darwin's theory of evolution and expresses that enchantment. But if you're 5 kilometers down the road, then the theory of Darwinian evolution, it presupposes that life already exists and wasn't proposing an origin of life, but an origin of species. And so in that sense, he proposed a method to explain the survival of the fittest, but he didn't even attempt to answer the question of the arrival of the fittest. But every time Alex pushed him on that, he just kept falling back to, oh, well, the big question is about species anyways. And I was like, what? How is that the big question?
Yeah. Let's just talk about that too quickly, because I think this is another one of the reasons why the new atheists have lost favor in the society. You're dealing with the society of social justice wokeism, okay? But new atheism doesn't fit well into that in its heavy reliance upon Darwinian evolution, in particular how quickly and easily that can birth racism of all sorts. And so you have different new atheists like Sam Harris who have been accused of racism. And and in fact, he's doubled down on it, though, where he would argue that black people, particularly in Africa, are not as smart with regards to the IQ bell curve, if you guys are unfamiliar with that. Some of the writing and speaking he's done on this.
Yeah, just so we're clear, that's not your view, that's Harris's view, right?
Thank you. Yes, this is not my view, this is Harris's view, but it's a view that is popularized by a number of different people right now. Not just Harris, but others. And I think that, again, that's another one of those kind of things leveled against them going, where people are like, I don't agree with this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, what's the subtitle to The Origin of Species that everybody forgets?
Right.
It's the preservation of the favored races and the struggle for life.
In fact, I don't remember a time when I picked up a modern copy of On the Origin of Species and have seen the subtitle printed on the cover page. It's always on the inside, like what they call I think it's called the bastard cover page. Pardon the language, I think that's just what they call it. Yeah. But it's always there. It's not. Yeah,
they've dropped
front. Yeah.
And you can even see now, if you go on Amazon, you can see a lot of them have just dropped the subtitle entirely. Yeah. But that's part of the conversation at play here that is interesting, by the way. In Andy Bannister's article that he wrote, he was talking a bit about how Dawkins is trying to reinvent himself. He's trying to get outside some of those negative stereotypes that are happening right now, I think. I want to talk about something else, though, that I think is really important about what was expressed in this video that if you've watched it, we've just got to talk about at some level. And that is a little bit deeper. That is that Dawkins does not like Craig and has refused to debate Craig because he sees Craig as being immoral, which again is ironic, as you mentioned, Wes, because, as Dawkins writes, there is no morality. We are just DNA and we dance to it. Paraphrasing him in what was that book?
That was River Out of Eden.
So I mean, there's just irony right there. It's like, well, you don't even think morality exists to begin with, but you're disgusted by by this person because you think he's immoral, and thus you refuse to debate him. So, I mean, there's a problem right there. But it does raise the question of, is this a legitimate concern about Christianity that, you know, that the Old Testament and different books like Joshua and Judges, what do we do with that as Christians that might watch this, you know, interview with Alex and Dawkins and be like, I don't know what to do with this?
Yeah. Well, this is why I think biblical literacy is so important for the average Christian, because I think a lot of Christians know it's in there, but they don't really know how to interact with the subject material, and especially the historical framework that exists in. I think it was Andy Bannister actually who proposed this idea that I've used in my talk on the problem of evil before, is that if you come to something like the eradication of the Canaanites in the Old Testament cold, and you're not really understanding the context there, it leads you to a perspective that probably isn't just or right. And so Bannister used the illustration of watching Star Wars, but just watching the part where the rebels destroy the Death Star. And it's like, they're going in there, they're destroying the Death. I mean, this is a planet-sized spaceship. You don't know if there are families in there. You don't know if, like, Luke, what did you just do, you genocidal maniac? You just destroyed hundreds, if not thousands of people. And they're all like cheering. They're like, woo, yeah, we won. Like, if you didn't understand, help me out, Steve. Which movie was that? I'm not a Star Wars fan enough.
Oh, shoot. The Return of the Jedi, was it?
The Return of the Jedi? Let's go with it, and then all of our listeners can get mad at us if we're wrong. The Return of the Jedi. Like, if you didn't have the context of how bad the bad guys were, then you could very well say, Luke is a genocidal maniac. The rebels are evil people.
Oh, and just the context of the story in general, right?
Totally. Which goes back to Abraham. I mean, the promise that God makes with Abraham is that he's going to give him a land, but he's going to wait 400 years. Why? Because the sins of the Midianites have not come into their full fruition. He's like, no, I'm going to give 400 years. I'm going to give multiple generations a chance to repent.
And I think that's also really key. One of the things that really stood out in Richard Dawkins's kind of reaction to the story is that the way he used the word sinful. Oh, the Midianites were sinful, so they're going to be slaughtered. And I just, that nonchalant way of, almost this dismissive way of talking about sin, and knowing that his sort of lack of depth in philosophy and theology, I don't think he really understands the gravity of that, because maybe, and that's one of the reasons why actually in The Thinking series, when Andy was writing this, you specifically refrained from using the word sin because of the cultural baggage that comes with it, all the misunderstandings, right? So you instead decided to use a different word.
Yeah, I tend to use the word evil, but this is another one of those ironic moments, right, where Dawkins, on the one hand, will say that that's evil and he's disgusted by it. Of course, he doesn't think that evil exists. But then on the flip side, this is something too that they also talked about, is that they're actually attracted to Christianity at some level, because when you compare it to the other worldviews, it's actually pretty great. And so then that causes trouble. But I do appreciate what Dawkins said in response to that, as he said, I'm looking for truth. I want to know whether or not it's true. And I thought, you know what? I agree with you. That is critical, right? We want to know whether or not it's true.
It's critical, but it's also a very theological standpoint. Why are you putting truth as the arbiter, as your thing? Why? It's almost like it's some sort of transcendental logos that you're appealing to on the basis of, that's what's going through my head. It's like, okay, why? So what? I mean, truth, you literally believe that non-life produced life, and that a non-mind produced mind, that we get minds from mindless matter. So why even bother pursuing truth? I want to encourage Dawkins in that, but I also want to know why he has that perspective to begin with. And I don't think he can really get to that question without admitting that there's something to religion and religious philosophy and theology.
Yeah, and like it or not, right? I know Richard Dawkins is very much, he's a scientist in the sense that he's scientistic. He holds to scientism, the idea that with modern science you can explain just about everything, right? Some ideal form of physics can exhaustively describe the world that we live in. But one thing that we can't get away from is the fact that we all come to the table, even way long before we even start doing science. We bring to the table all of our values, our priorities, our philosophical and theological notions. We may not name them as such, but like you pointed out, like why pursue truth? Why is that important? There's already a value-laden sort of thing that he's bringing to the table, and I am not sure that people who hold to scientism necessarily are aware of that.
It's a great point. And of course, Alvin Plantinga makes a great critique of that, where he wrote a great book called Where the Conflict Really Lies, where he's challenging a worldview like what Dawkins would hold to, going, well, how do you even have confidence that you can arrive at truth? And that this Darwinism that you've put so much hope in has the ability to evolve towards truth. I mean, that is that's some wishful thinking, especially given the mechanics that are at play. Kind of going back to what you're talking about, there's a bigger story that's going on here with regards to, these moments in Scripture when we read about war. And that's what we're talking about when you read Joshua, for example. You're reading accounts of war, and you need to appreciate, as you were just talking about, you need to appreciate the backstory that's at play. So as you had just mentioned, but then there's other aspects are at play, and I think Paul Copan does a good job of bringing these out, saying, listen, when you actually read before these wars, God went to drive the people out of the land and used various means to do that. And when we come to the war passages themselves, we're dealing with the people that have remained in the land, and that unfortunately we live in a broken world, that evil and sin is a part of the world that we live in, that I don't think we fully appreciate the depths and the level of the wickedness that are in our world. So, I mean, again, we got this interesting irony that's at play where Dawkins and Alex like the Christian worldview in what it brings about, but in the good that it has achieved at some level. They think it's a better worldview than the others, if you will. They don't fully appreciate the wickedness that has existed and that people are capable of. We're living in one of the most peaceful times the world has ever known.
Yeah, it's a good point. At the exact same time, though, I think individuals like Alex and Dawkins want to have their cake and eat it too, in the sense that they want to object to Christianity on the basis of too much evil in the world. But when we look at the Old Testament and see examples where God is actually doing something about the evil in the world, they're like, well, that's not the way I would do it, so it's obviously the wrong way. And you're like, right. No, God is practically, in that sense, although we're thousands of years removed from the ancient Near Eastern context, so we might not realize it, but he's doing something about a culture where rape, where murder, where the sort of presuppositions of slavery and the evil that is soaked on the human heart is in full display within their contextual context. Contextual context? That doesn't make any sense. Societal, historical context, just doubling up on words here, is often missed. We object to God about not doing enough about the problem of evil, but then when we see examples in Scripture where God is doing something, we then point the finger at God and say that he's wrong for doing it.
Yeah. Do you know, one of the things that just strikes me in this whole conversation is notice when we're talking about these two atheists, Alex and Dawkins, that are talking about Christianity and what is their major objection. I don't know about you guys, but in all the talks I've done, as I have interacted with people over the years, it constantly comes back to the question of why is there evil, why is there suffering? I'm just always shocked by that. Notice they didn't get into these scientific arguments, and and whatnot. No, the majority of the conversation was about whether or not God's good. It's just fascinating to me how this is the question from Adam and Eve till now that we struggle with.
So I think as we, come up on an hour, start to think about landing this plane, I think one of the things, so if the listener is listening to this and they're thinking, okay, we're talking about all these things and these ideas and these concepts, how, Steve and Andy, how do we think Christianly? How do we encourage the listener to think Christianly about taking these types of conversations, which are happening by individuals like Alex O'Connor and Richard Dawkins, and transition those into maybe everyday conversations that the listeners might be having on their own?
Mm-hmm. Wow, that's a great question. Some of the immediate things that come to my mind is just, for one, to remind ourselves that people are not simply merely rational creatures, right? That God has designed us in such a way that not only does truth matter, but the good matters, the beautiful matters, right? And there may be something, even for somebody like Richard Dawkins, who's so ardently atheist, there are certain things that he cherishes. He's longing for the good, I think, as much as he denies it. I think he's longing for the beautiful. In fact, he's mentioned that he often attends Christmas Eve carol services because he just enjoys it, right? Imagine encountering him in a church service, right? That should be interesting, just imagining that. But I think there is a longing there. So what we want to do, I think, is when we talk to people, what are people longing for? And how does Jesus fulfill that longing? Not only the true, but also the good and the beautiful, especially the beautiful. I think that would be key. I know it's a little abstract, but I think that gives you a good framework, I think, of interacting with other people.
Andy, any words of wisdom, practical advice from the president himself?
I just think, just quickly and practically, I think Alex actually modeled a really good posture of being able to look at something from two different perspectives, looking at atheism and the good arguments that it can and does put forward, and then also looking at the theistic Christian worldview in particular and the good arguments that it puts forward, and how can I appreciate both, and ultimately, as we are seeking, what is the truth, and to do that in a way that is coherent and that is robust and that's being honest, and so ultimately, this is what we're after, and I constantly want to come at this thing from like a parental perspective and going, I want to help my kids to be able to navigate, YouTube videos well and the like when they're coming across this content, that they can appreciate the bigger conversation that's at play.
Well, I think this is a good place to wrap up. Thank you so much, listeners, for joining us today on this week's edition of the AC Podcast. The AC Podcast is a ministry of Apologetics Canada, so find us on whatever your favorite platform is, like and subscribe and all that good stuff, and help us, climb the ladders of whatever our algorithmic overlords have put there for us. But I hope you have a wonderful rest of the week, and we'll come back next week with more stuff to think about. Until then, you know the drill. Love God and love people.
It's the